Hello everybody and thank you for joining me. This is Sierra from Sierra T Designs and today I have these really pretty mini slimline cards to share with you for visible image. So let's jump right in. So I'm going to cut down some cardstock to start. I'm going to create the bases of my mini slimline cards. And for me, I like my mini slimline cards to be 6 inches and then I score at the 3-inch mark. So you're going to see me cut two bases as I'm going to create two cards, and then I'm also going to cut a 6 by 6 inch piece of cardstock to do my ink blending on. And that'll be a piece of HammerMill cardstock. I like HammerMill just because it's super smooth and it works really well for a lot of different techniques, but any cardstock you have will work for this. I do prefer a heavyweight cardstock for my bases, which is what you'll see me using here. But I'm a bit of a cardstock snob, so I tend to own a lot of different cardstocks. You don't need a whole bunch of them. I just happen to have some. So this is the panel I'm cutting down to be the panel on the card, and then the two on the side there are going to be my bases. And then here you can see I'm going to score it at the 3-inch mark. I like to score on both sides just because I use such a heavyweight cardstock. It will, right now, because it's so cold where I am, it does end up cracking a little bit, which is also another reason why I like to score on both sides. It helps to prevent the cracking. This doesn't normally happen, but just because it's so cold here right now and they're so staticky and everything, it just seems to be cracking a bit more for me, but it's still not horrible. And then here you can see I'm going to blend on my HammerMill cardstock. So for my cardstock, for my colors, I have picked raspberry, carved pumpkin, squeezed lemonade, twisted citron, Mermaid, Lagoon, and wilted violet. That's kind of my preferred palette for a rainbow when I do stuff with oxides. Now, of course, it's going to be a preference. I use pink instead of red. That's a choice. By all means, do whatever color blend you like. And don't worry about it being perfect, because at this stage, we're going to cover this up, which I know is very scary. You'd be amazed. I've done this technique once before on my channel quite a while ago. And a lot of the comments I got were just like, people were like aghast that I put color on top of this, but that is the technique. The technique is an emboss resist, right? So, and I create this super colorful, vibrant background to go underneath so that when you go over top of it, you still have all this vibrancy. You just get it in such a cool way. So, there's no right or wrong way to do this. And then I brought in the stamps. These are visible images round in circles stamps, and I'm going to use all of them. I've got them all on different acrylic blocks. Excuse me, and I'm going to stamp them out. And I have 6 inks here. They're Distress Archival inks in Picked Raspberry, Spiced Marmalade, Fossilized Amber, Mermaid, Lagoon, Peeled Paint, and Dusty Concord. These are the only ones I own. I know there's some new ones out. I don't actually currently own them, so I'm just using the ones that I have. And of course, I picked them in the colors that would be closest to what I've used in my background. And I'm just stamping the circles kind of willy-nilly all over the background. There's no real rhyme or reason to how I'm creating the background. Honestly, some of it's going to get covered up. So, and because I'm not 100% sure what pieces you're going to be able to see and which pieces you aren't going to be able to see, I just covered the whole background and I just chose different colors and different areas, and I just stuck with whatever looked good while I was doing this. And it doesn't have to be circles. It could be any stamp set you have or like. I like circles. I think that it always looks kind of neat and it's very eye-catching. So I do have a tendency towards the circles, but anything would really work here. And then I'm going to use my anti-static bag. Again, like I said, it's very dry here, so I always use it. It's just a fail-safe for me. And I have a finger dauber so that I can get in the really tight areas of this stencil. And the stencil is the Visible Image Butterfly Ink stencil, and it's just stunning. And I thought with this technique, it would just look really neat. So I am using my finger dauber. You could try wiping the ink pad directly onto the stencil. That would likely work as well, but I was a little concerned that it wouldn't get into the paint splattery areas, and of course that would kind of take away from the design, right? That's kind of a whole coolness of this specific stencil. So I did choose to use my finger dauber instead. And then here I'm just going to bring in some embossing powder. This is Icicle. It is a clear embossing powder, and I'm just going to sprinkle it all over the background. You can see I obviously need to buy some more. I'm getting kind of low, but I just sprinkle it all over the background, and then that's going to give you that area where the butterfly stencil was. And again, this is why I had to use my anti-static powder tool, because my background is inked. If my ink hadn't been dry, and if I hadn't used the anti-static powder tool, I would have embossing powder everywhere. And you don't want that. You only want it where the stencil was. I mean, otherwise it kind of takes away from the technique that you're kind of creating here. And then of course we are going to heat set this until it is smooth and melted, which I know is a little difficult to see simply because, I mean, it's clear on top of a whole bunch of color. So, I mean, you do see it kind of go from that milky white a little bit to that clear, which I think is so stunning. And now again, just to prepare you, I am going to cover this in ink. Don't get worried. It will turn out. I mean, you've seen the pictures. You know how the cards turned out in the end, but there's still usually somebody who really struggles with the fact that I'm going to put some black soot over top right here, see? But I promise it turns out. So I just swiped my pad all over the background. Now, you could, of course, use a different ink if you wanted to. I am using Distress Oxide ink, which will give a bit more of a chalky finish. That is the makeup of that ink. You could come in with a different ink. This is one of the biggest black inks that I own, other than my ones that I use specifically for detail stamping. So, and it goes with the colors that I've already used. The colors I used were Oxide, so you kind of get that chalkier finish anyway, so it kind of works out together. But I mean, totally use what you have. I mean, that's what's going to work, but I do prefer the oxides. And then here I'm just going to show you that I brought in, this is a baby wipe. I buy mine at Costco, and I just wipe away any of the color that's sitting on top of the embossing, because this is the whole technique, right? You can remove any ink that's just floating on top of the embossing powder. You do have to be careful because, of course, black soot, oxide, distress, all the distresses are water reactive. So if you wipe the baby wipe across the black soot, it will lift some of that color. So be aware of that. You're going to see it. It halos a little bit. I'm not worried about it. I do a second coat of my Distress Oxide, my black soot, just because I wanted it to be a darker color. And I wanted to have it cover the background a little bit better. And I found that it was a little bit patchy in some areas. It was my application. But I just thought it would look nice. So I did remove all of the stuff off of the embossing just to really show you. And then I am going to do a second layer of the Distress Oxide color, but I won't show you removing the ink again, although I do, of course, because I do put a little bit back onto the colored area. But you do get that kind of chalky effect because this is a Distress Oxide ink, but I kind of like it. It almost makes me think of like chalkboards, like when you go to try to erase all the stuff off the chalkboard, you get that kind of halo of the chalk. I don't know. That's just kind of what I think. And I just kind of think it's neat. So I do have a soft spot for it. But yeah, so I did a second layer here of the Distress Oxide black soot, as you can see. And then of course I did go back in and wipe off all of the ink that was sitting on top of the butterfly. So at this point, my background is completely dry. I cut it in half because, of course, that will be the full front of my mini slimline card. And I am going to trim down a little bit off of each side as well, just so that I can create a panel, a mat for my background. Or sorry, for my panel. I like to mat things. That is kind of how I like to do. And I do have this really pretty black shimmery cardstock here. It's very thin, but it works really well when you want to mat things. So I'm going to cut it down to be about 1/8 of an inch smaller than my bases. And I cut my panel down to be about just under 1/4 of an inch smaller. So you get about 1/8 of an inch around it, and you get about 1/8 of an inch around the other area to get the white. That's kind of what I did. I mean, I eyeball my measurements, so they're never exact, but that's what I tried for. And then for my sentiments, I have the Visible Images Go to Words stamp set. And I'm going to heat emboss that on some vellum. I didn't want to take away from the background, but of course I wanted to add a sentiment. And as you guys know, if you've been on my channel for a minute, I always need more birthday and thank you cards. That just seems to be the ones that I send out the most. So I can never have enough thank you and birthday cards. So I am going to, I'm going to heat set these in a second. I think I have my things in the wrong order. So we're going to go backwards here in a second. I'm going to adhere down. Oh, no, I didn't. I'm going to adhere down my panel to my mat. And that's because I want to add the embossed vellum pieces around the 2 layers. You could do it on the single layer with the butterfly wing if you preferred, but I'm actually going to do it across both of the panels, so the mat and the front panel with the butterfly on it. And here we're going to melt the embossing powder. So I am just going to bring it up and melt it here. I did just cover it with a white embossing powder. It was a fine detail white embossing powder. And then we're going to jump straight into trimming these down as labels. Now, with vellum, you could absolutely score the vellum to create the edges. Personally, I have found that when I score it, I end up ripping it. So I tend not to score my vellum simply because I have had that issue. If you haven't had that issue, then by all means score it, but I tried not to. So you're going to see what I mean here in a sec when I start to wrap them around the panels, but I avoid scoring vellum because it just has never worked well for me. And you can see that I just trimmed them down into 2 labels, and I left them long so that I would be able to fold them around the panel and the mat. So here you're going to see where I'm going to hold it up and I'm going to line it up, and then I'm going to just gently fold the vellum around the side of the panel. And again, you can score it if you like. I don't, because I'm always worried that I'm going to crack it or rip it. So I just have a tendency not to do that. And then I have this is 1/8 of an inch score tape, and I'm going to use that to adhere down the pieces of vellum that go behind the card. This is simply because I know that they're a very strong adhesive, and I'm not worried about the pieces not adhering or shifting or moving or waiting for it to dry if it's like a liquid glue. And I do one side and then just double check that I'm still straight, and then I'll lift the other side and adhere that flap down. So that's just kind of the way I like to do it. There's no wrong way, however. So, I mean, do whatever works for you. I just have found with vellum, it's just the easiest way for me to adhere it. And then I brought in my Nuvo Deluxe glue, and I'm just going to adhere this straight down onto the card base. And then I'm going to leave about, they say like the 1/8 of an inch of the border around the panel. And I'm going to adhere them both down on the panels there, on the bases, sorry. It's just directly onto it. There's no dimension to this card. There's no layers outside of the base there. Like, I didn't prop anything up or use foam tape or anything like that for this. They are both flat just because they're way easier to mail that way. So it's just kind of a preference because I mail a fair amount of cards. So I do like them to be fairly flat and easily mailable. And then, of course, because I love everything shiny, I had to bring in some jewels. So these are just the Pink Fresh Essential jewels. They're the black ones that come in that set. And I just adhered them around the butterflies, kind of on a diagonal. And I chose black. I mean, you could absolutely choose another color, but I didn't want to take away from the color of the butterflies. I think that those wings are just stunning and very eye-catching. So I chose really not to add any more color to this. And that is the card I have for you guys this week. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you'll give this technique a chance. I think that it turns out really stunning, and you can do so many different things with the backgrounds to create different colors and different patterns. So thank you so much, guys. I hope you'll consider subscribing. Leave me a like, leave me a comment, and I will see you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.